Welcome to the Sounds Podcast and the Sounds of Film radio show. I'm your host, Tom Needham, bringing you in-depth conversations with filmmakers, composers, and artists. Today we're thrilled to explore the incredible life of Christopher Reeve through the lens of a new documentary, Superman, the Christopher Reeve Story. Joining us is the director, Peter Ettedgui, who delved into Reeve's transformation from Hollywood's most iconic Superman to a courageous advocate for disability rights and spinal cord research. Superman is a deeply moving documentary about Christopher Reeve's life and legacy. Known for his acclaimed work on McQueen and Rising Phoenix, Peter brings a wealth of experience in crafting biographical and culturally significant narratives. This moving documentary is an unforgettable tribute to a real-life hero who defied the odds and inspired the world. The movie's going to be streaming on Max. Peter, thank you so much for joining us today on The Sounds of Film.
Thanks so much, Tom. And it's a great privilege to be here. I love your podcast. And one thing I just want to say is that I'm the co-director of the film. My fellow director, Ian Bonhôte, is very much part not just of this film, but of our two previous films that you referred to. So I'm here representing one half of the double act.
That is absolutely true. And I did just get wind that it was just going to be you, but I'm very happy to have
Yeah,
you. But you are known as
very
a
happy to
team,
be here.
and it's a unique thing. So, what made the two of you want to tell the Christopher Reeve story in the first place?
Um, I mean, you just talked about Rising Phoenix, and that was a very seminal film for us to make because it was really our introduction into the world of disability, disability rights, the uh, the difficulties of people living with disabilities in a ableist world. These were all things that were part and parcel of the story of the Paralympic movement, which is what that film was about. And while we were making it, we saw some footage of, we didn't actually, it didn't find its way into the final cut of the film, but we saw some footage of Christopher about a year after his accident, um, kind of as the MC of the Atlanta 1996 Paralympic Games. And I think that image of him speaking to the athletes and himself quadriplegic at that point and on a ventilator really stuck with us. And we didn't actually come up with the idea of making the film. That was very much an archive producer who had reached out to the Reeve family, um, Daniel Kilroy, and Daniel established that the Reeves did have a whole cache of archives, and that they were open to entertaining the idea of a film being made about their father in the right hands. And that's when we began a conversation with the three Reeve kids, formed a relationship. They'd seen our previous work, which they were very fond of. So they were very open to the idea of us directing the film. Yeah, so that's how it started for us. It was why did we want to tell the story? Well, as I say, it's partly to do with having made Rising Phoenix and feeling that this was a story that was not just about Superman. It was about somebody who had become a great advocate within the disability world, controversial one as well, but nevertheless a really, really important voice. Um, and obviously the other side of it is the Superman side of it. It's the fact that I'd grown up with Christopher. He was, as so many people say this, but he was my Superman
Mm-hmm.
growing up, and I had followed his story both as an actor and then as an advocate later in his life after the accident. With rapt interest, without ever realizing that I would one day have an opportunity to tell the story myself and with Ian. So I mean, it was a sort of it was a no-brainer because I think that you can use it's wonderful playing with those iconic moments from Superman, but that's like a doorway into a world of a really complex and interesting life that has so much narrative interest, I think, for a contemporary audience. And as we started making the film, we realized it wasn't just about Christopher Reeve, it was about these two women who'd become his partners at different times of his life. First of all,
Mm-hmm.
Gay Exton, and then later Dana Reeve, who was just there by his side in the years after his accident, and in the creation of the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. Um, and then the three kids themselves, who are, kind of really wonderful human beings, absolutely carry the legacy of their father in their lives. Um, um, as it's something that's so important to them. So, it was wonderful working with them, and in a way, they become the lens through which we tell this story.
As you just said, it's an incredible story and it's an important story. I did find, though, some of the early stuff just about Christopher Reeve, like pre Superman, what kind of actor he was before he got that big role, and then how Superman changed his life. That part of the story is also very interesting. Can you tell us a little bit about what you learned about the man, the actor, pre Superman?
Well, the first, I mean, I didn't realize he'd done quite so much theatre and was so obsessed with theatre. On one of our first research trips, we sort of found ourselves opening up these boxes of archive, of paper archive, and I was reading his essays from Cornell about Greek tragedy, and so it became very clear that he was incredibly serious about the theatre, both as an actor, but also with the realization of that theatre could tell stories that were resonant with social and political issues. And he was fascinated by that from the earliest time in his life. And also that he'd found in theatre a kind of substitute family for his own, for what he lacked at home. He came from a broken home. He was not estranged from his father, but he certainly had a very difficult relationship with his dad. And, he sought safety and friendship and family bonds within the theatre troops that he was working with from the youngest age. I mean, he was sort of like doing work in theatre both at school but in summer stock from the age of like 11 or 12 or something. He was sort of like he burnt with it. It was a passion for him, and we absolutely are able to allude to some of that in the film, but not nearly as much as there is. His relationship with the theatre and his love of the stage runs through his life like a stick of rock. It's really important to him.
And you sort of make the point in the film that it was that theatrical background and also the type of person that he was himself that really added depth to the role of Superman. Can you explain that a little bit to our listeners?
Yeah, sure. I mean, he took all every single part he played, he took incredibly seriously. He worked really hard on understanding character and understanding the nature of the play and thinking about it on a number of different levels. And when that was no different when he came to Superman, he was derided by his father, by fellow actors like William Hurt. He said, "Don't go near this film; it'll ruin your career." Um, but he saw in it the opportunity to tell a very resonant mythical story, um, and that he saw the opportunity. When he was exploring how to play Clark Kent and Superman, he wanted Superman to be a friend to humanity. He wanted to kind of project not a not a sort of like opposing bodybuilder figure, but someone who had real warmth and a
Mm.
real need to protect and nurture. So that was one part of it. And then Clark Kent, he kind of like he looked at Cary Grant in Bringing Up Baby and a couple of his other films where and he really took his cue from that kind of like 1950s cinema,
Right.
Hollywood cinema, and built the part using those elements really. And yeah, he took it very, very seriously in a way that no one else did. And I think that had he not, well, no one, literally no one else, absolutely Richard Donner did as well. He absolutely, they both were seeking authenticity. And I think had they not achieved that, then maybe we wouldn't be talking about the whole sort of superhero galaxy universe
Mm.
um, that we live in today in on cinema screens.
Well, you make that point in the film that it's hard to remember with all the Marvel films out today and everything that this was really a significant breakthrough for Hollywood to be able to make a feature film about a superhero. It seems strange today to think that that was a big deal, but it really was back then.
It really was. And in fact, Warner, that owned DC, thought it was the most bizarre thing when they were approached by these three European producers, and sort of like, they wanted to make a film about Superman. They kind of thought, well, okay, well, no one else is going to do it. I mean, they must be out of their minds, but um, let them do it. And they were kind of quite surprised when Brando and Hackman both committed to being in it. Um, and then, of course, yeah, it's sort of like it birthed a whole new genre of cinema.
Wow. Before we get into what happened to him in his tragic accident, you spend a lot of time kind of explaining to viewers that he wasn't just Superman on the screen. Christopher Reeve was a remarkable person in terms of his personal life and the types of leisure activities that he participated in. And can you give us just a little sense of the very full life he was living outside of making movies?
Yeah, uh, he was a passionate sort of athlete, a really good tennis player, a skier, a sailor. Um, he loved um, uh, he loved his activities. He loved traveling. He was also a really good pianist. Um, to get a couple of snatches of him playing the piano, but they don't really hint at what level he was at as a kind of classically trained pianist who could turn his hand to jazz and show tunes and everything else. So,
Hmm.
he's a remarkably rounded individual. But you also discovered the chinks in the armor, that the vulnerabilities and the sort of the areas of insecurity and his flaws of the character, and that's really interesting to get into as a contrast to this sort of like kind of heroic, rugged
Hmm.
figure who seems to be able to turn his hand to anything.
It's incredible. So most people know what happened to Christopher Reeve, but just in case there's anyone out there who doesn't know, can you describe what was the tragic event that took place um, and led to really what is focused on the most in your movie?
Yeah, I mean, um, you know, Christopher had learnt to ride horses in spite of the fact that he was allergic to them. In order to play a part, he was in a film version of Anna Karenina, and and uh, after that during that experience, he fell in love with horses, and with horse riding, and he became a very serious equestrian following that. And um, he had his own horses. He learnt every aspect of competitive horse riding, dressage, show jumping, and he competed in a number of competitions. And you know, um, on Memorial Day weekend of 1995, he was in one such competition uh, um, just before he was due to fly to the UK to be in Treasure Island. Um, and he thought he'd squeeze in one last competition before he left. Uh, and that was that accident. In that competition, while he was preparing and just doing a test run, his horse did what's called a dirty stop in front of a jump, and Chris went over the shoulder of the horse, didn't manage to get his hand untangled from the reins, and landed on his head and broke his neck. Um, and that left him with basically he was quadriplegic, and he was dependent on a ventilator to breathe, which, you know, it struck me at a certain point when we were making the film is he was permanently wired to life support, which if it gave up on him, he would die. Simple as that. One of the extraordinary things that Robin Williams and Marsha Williams did for Christopher, we'll get into maybe talking about their profound friendship, but one of the things that he did was get a backup generator installed at the Reeve house, which he paid for. They paid for them. Williams paid for themselves, in order that if the electricity ever cut out, there would be a backup so that Christopher would still be able to breathe.
Wow.
Um, so that was the accident, and you're right in saying that this became the primary focus of the film. We kind of like thought, in a way, when you do a biography, you've always got to pick a lane. And for us, the story of Christopher, coming out of the coma sustained after the accident, and realizing that he was on life support, he was never likely to move again, and kind of like asking Dana to have his life support switched off, but then sort of gradually discovering a reason to live, namely Dana, and her great love for him, and the family, his three young children, um, and then beyond that, discovering a purpose for his life. And that purpose took on many different facets. It took on the fact that he put on screen and in public, he would show himself so that people might feel a little bit less repelled by the idea of disability or wanted to turn away from it. Um, so that was one important thing he did. But then he also sort of like laid the ground for scientific and medical research in an area of medicine that was really regarded as you know, as the kind of the graveyard of research at that time. No one was interested in taking it on because it seemed like there was nothing that could be done. And Christopher galvanized that community to start looking for new cures, new treatment forms of treatment. He, fought political battles to make sure that insurance caps could be raised for people suffering from bad disabilities. And with Dana, and in part because of Dana, he started a foundation that not only financed research but also financed projects that improve quality of life for people living with disabilities. It's an extraordinary story, and it's a heroic story, a genuinely heroic story, that is in contrast to his previous life before the accident as an on-screen superhero. So it struck us very early on that we should have a sort of flashback narrative that the main story would be from the moment he wakes up to after his accident to his eventual death in 2004, and that we would then interweave the story of his past within that.
I love the way it's a nonlinear story, and the editing is amazing. You mentioned Robin Williams just really quickly. This film is deep. It goes into a lot of places. It's philosophical, and it's incredible. I know we don't have too much more time, but
No, no.
you mentioned that Robin Williams and Christopher Reeve were good friends for a very long time. And you mentioned how he really reached out and helped him in so many ways. But one can't help but forget what happened with Robin Williams also. And
Mm.
and that's there too, for the viewer to think about. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, it's difficult. I mean, Glenn Close has that line near the end of the film where she says, had Christopher not died, then maybe Robin would still be with us. But I'm not very keen on that hypothesis. I mean, I think that the fact is that these two were more than close friends. They called each other brother. They were each other's chosen family in a sense.
Mm.
Not that they didn't have wonderful families themselves, but they had a very special relationship from the time that they met at Juilliard to the time of Christopher's death. And And I think that each of them gave something to the other. I mean, they both had a sort of like an awareness, as Susan Sarandon says, an awareness of the darker aspects of life. I think that was probably true before the accident as well as after the accident, but they gave each other something that the other lacked. So Christopher had this sense of, solidity and dependability and seriousness of purpose. And Robin had this sort of anarchic sense of humor. Um, and I think the two things complemented each other and brought them together. And, Robin lightened Christopher up, and Christopher kind of like probably gave Robin a kind of like a kind of solidity that he lacked otherwise. So it's a very beautiful story, their friendship, and it was something that we were able to express in the film, largely thanks to Marsha Williams giving us some wonderful archive material of the two of them together. Um, I mean, we were spoilt for choice with archiving this film. We had such generosity from the Reeve family, from Marsha, from everyone who became involved or who we talked to had something precious to give us, and that was a wonderful thing to work with.
Well, this is a remarkable film. Christopher's story is truly inspiring. So is the whole family, and hopefully, this movie is going to encourage people to support the foundation and support research in this area. There's a lot of progress going on, which you make clear in the film. Um, Peter, I want to thank you so much for coming on the program today. We've been
Oh,
speaking
such a
about,
pleasure, Tom.
yeah, of course, Superman, the Christopher Reeve story. It's going to be streaming on Max, and I really want to wish you the best with this movie.
Thank you very much, Tom. Lovely to speak.
Take it easy. Bye bye.